The day it began was unremarkable. Overcast skies, a lukewarm cup of tea, the faint hum of a neighbor's lawnmower in the distance. I had just returned from yoga, my mind still wrapped in that quiet post-stretch clarity, when I found the envelope on the kitchen counter. Unmarked. No return address. A single, quiet anomaly in a house built on routine. I stood there in my leggings, my skin still dewy from the session, staring at the envelope as if it were some relic unearthed from a forgotten past. The wax seal shimmered faintly in the morning light, deep red, like dried blood. My fingers trembled slightly as I cracked it open. I told myself it was nothing. A marketing gimmick, maybe. But my gut already knew. Inside was a single photograph. Crisp, glossy, deliberate. A man who looked exactly like my Jonathan, dressed in a navy blazer I'd never seen, his arm wrapped with disturbing familiarity around a woman I definitely hadn't. They were laughing, heads tilted toward each other in that effortless intimacy that comes from years, not weeks, of closeness. Her hand rested on his chest, a casual claim of possession. On the back of the photo, a date. 2 weeks ago. Location, Miami. Beneath the photo was a small slip of paper with a printed address. A condo complex. High-end. I didn't recognize it, and scrawled across the bottom in neat, almost feminine handwriting. You deserve to know who he really is. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat. My breath slowed, my pulse quickened, and a hollow, metallic taste settled in the back of my throat. The tea cooled beside me, untouched. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder. Somewhere outside, a child laughed. I stared at the photograph for hours, as if it would morph into something else, an advertisement, a prank, a terrible misunderstanding. But it never did. It remained exactly what it was. Evidence. When Jonathan came home that evening, I watched him. Really watched him. The way he loosened his tie, the extra beat he took before entering the kitchen, the way he sniffed his wine before sipping, it was all rehearsed. Too perfect. Too clean. Like a man playing the role of a husband rather than living it. That night, I lay next to him in bed and listened to his breathing. Steady. Rhythmic. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the man in Miami. The man who laughed openly. The man who let a stranger touch his chest. This wasn't infidelity. This was a fracture in reality. That weekend, I told him I was visiting my sister in Vermont. A lie clean and simple. He didn't even look up. Tell her I said hi, he murmured, scrolling through something on his phone. Stocks? Emails? Her messages? I booked the flight to Miami. The plane ride felt like drifting through fog. I barely noticed the clouds outside the window or the drone of the engines. All I could see was that photograph. Her hand. His smile. Jack. The condo complex was sleek, almost sterile, a stack of glass and steel overlooking the Atlantic. It reeked of wealth and detachment. I parked a rented car across the street and waited. The hours crept by, thick with tension and humidity. My fingers clenched the steering wheel until they ached. At exactly 6:12 p.m., he emerged. Jonathan. My Jonathan. Only he wasn't. He wore white linen, sunglasses, a casual swagger I hadn't seen since our honeymoon. He looked happy. The woman from the photograph was beside him, laughing, touching his arm. They kissed. He kissed her. I watched them as if from underwater. Disbelief didn't even have time to root itself. It was like watching someone die and be reborn into someone else's arms. They walked to a restaurant by the beach, their silhouettes framed by gold light and crashing waves. I followed at a distance, my phone camera quietly capturing everything. Her fingers looped around his. He called her darling. She called him Jack. That night, in the sterile silence of my hotel room, I examined every recording, every image, every angle. It was him. It was all him. And yet, he was unrecognizable. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. No tears came. No rage. Just a slow, steady sharpening of the mind. The kind of clarity that comes when you cross the line between heartbreak and purpose. He didn't just betray me. He erased me. This wasn't about an affair. This was about erasure. Reinvention. He had built another world without me, one where I was inconvenient. One where he had a new name, a new rhythm, a new story. And I would burn it all down. I didn't try to speech. I didn't plan a confrontation. I made a list. Not of words. Of evidence. Accounts. Dates. Faces. Names. Each item would be a nail in the coffin of Jack's second life. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would dismantle him, piece by lying piece. I flew home the next morning cloaked in calm. Not a single tremor in my hands as I handed over my boarding pass. Not a quiver in my voice when I called Jonathan from the cab pretending I had just left my sister's place. "Yeah, we had a nice walk by the lake," I said, as I stared out the window at the flat Miami skyline receding behind me. "She sends her love." He asked me nothing more. He never really asked much. By the time I landed in Boston, I had a plan. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Confrontation implies chaos, a volatile release. I wanted silence. Strategy. I wanted the truth to unspool at my command, every thread weaving a trap he wouldn't see until it was too late. The first step was creating distance. Emotional, psychological, operational. I bought a second phone. A burner. Registered under a name I made up on the spot, Claire Devon. Claire had a Miami number and a digital footprint clean as snow. I used it to begin digging. Into him. Into her. Into the web of lies I had lived in for what must have been years. Jack Whitmore. That was the name he used in Miami. He had a LinkedIn profile, a shell company tied to a South Florida address, even a lease agreement. I accessed it using a password he'd once used for our shared Netflix account. Lazy. Predictable. The woman was named Julia. Julia Carlton. An interior designer with a glowing portfolio and a taste for minimalist beach decor. Her Instagram was a goldmine: sunset photos, dinner parties, slow-motion kisses with Jack. She had no idea she was curating evidence for her own destruction. The second step was documentation. I created a folder on an encrypted drive labeled Recipe Notes. Inside it, images, screenshots, voice memos, timestamps. I recorded myself narrating each event in chronological order, like an investigator assembling a case file. I even created aliases for them. Jack. Julia. The doppelganger life. Step 3 was surveillance. Back in Boston, I mirrored his phone. There's a software, quiet, legal in a gray area sort of way, that syncs texts, call logs, even location data in real time. I installed it while he showered one night, his phone unlocked on the bed. He trusted me that much. Or maybe he'd stopped even thinking of me as someone worth guarding against. I watched everything. I saw his client dinners, his overnight trips, his hotel bookings. I listened to him laugh on the phone with Julia. I heard him call her the real thing. And yet, he came home to me, ate my cooking, slept in my bed, kissed me goodbye each morning with the same lips he used to promise someone else a future. The duality would have broken a weaker woman. But I was past breaking. I wanted to see how deep the lie went. One night, after he fell asleep, I opened our safe. He never changed the combination, our anniversary date. Inside was a small stack of passports, a second phone I hadn't seen before, and a briefcase with documents. His birth certificate. Financial statements. A marriage license. But not ours. My breath caught. It was dated 4 years ago. Signed in Dade County. Jonathan, Jack, was married to Julia. Not just cheating. Not just a double life. He had committed bigamy. My fingers closed around the license. For a moment, I simply held it, letting the weight of the truth settle in my chest like lead. Then I carefully replaced everything and closed the safe. But something had shifted in me. I no longer felt like a wife, or a woman betrayed. I felt like a storm waiting to be named. That was the night I renamed my folder. From Recipe Notes to Requiem. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in my own home. Present, but untouchable. I cooked. I smiled. I pretended. Meanwhile, Claire Devon was busy. She opened a P.O. box. Opened a bank account. Hired a private investigator who specialized in digital forensics and spousal fraud. Every spare moment I documented. Every lie he told was folded into the architecture of his undoing. One afternoon, I followed him, not virtually but in person. He had a lunch meeting at a high-rise downtown. I watched from across the street as he emerged with a woman who wasn't Julia. Another one. This woman wore stilettos and a power suit, and the way he placed his hand on the small of her back made my teeth ache. 3 lives. 3 identities. I felt something snap into place. A click, like the final piece of a puzzle finding its corner. I started contacting attorneys, quietly, anonymously. One for divorce. One for fraud. One for criminal charges. I asked questions with surgical precision. What constitutes bigamy under Massachusetts law? What about Florida? Could assets be frozen before proceedings? I learned quickly. By the time I was ready, I had enough to end his career, his finances, his marriage, both of them. And if I played my hand correctly, he wouldn't even see it coming until his whole life collapsed like wet paper. I even made appointments with Julia, with the third woman, not to expose him yet, but to observe, to understand the ecosystem he had built, to measure their expressions, their trust. Julia met me in a cafe near the shoreline. I introduced myself as a freelance writer doing a profile on local creatives. She beamed with pride as she spoke about Jack, about how he was different, kind, how he'd rescued her from a toxic ex. She had no idea. I smiled and recorded every word. But revenge, I knew, was best served not just cold, but precise. And this was going to be a symphony. The morning I set everything in motion began like any other, foggy light filtering through the blinds, the soft clink of Jonathan's spoon against his cereal bowl. He was wearing that navy suit I used to admire, the one that once made him look like security, not a stranger. I kissed him goodbye at the door like always, even smiled as he disappeared down the street, briefcase in hand, phone already to his ear. Then I turned back into the house and locked the door behind me. It was time. Step 1, Julia. I sent her an email from a secure address with a subject line. You need to see this. No melodrama. Just a Dropbox link containing carefully curated images. A scan of the Dade County marriage license. Screenshots of his text exchanges with the other woman, labeled and time-stamped. A photo of me and Jonathan on our 10th anniversary, standing beneath the pergola he built in our backyard, the engraved ring on his finger glinting like a lie. I didn't add commentary. The truth needed no narration. Step 2. The anonymous tip. Massachusetts State Attorney General's Office, Fraud and Family Crimes Division. I sent a package, physical and digital, detailing evidence of bigamy, financial misconduct, tax discrepancies from a shell corporation, and falsified travel expenses filed under his consulting firm. I highlighted discrepancies between the Florida and Massachusetts marriage records. I made sure they knew this wasn't just personal, it was criminal. Step 3. The third woman, Amanda. That was her name. I discovered it after a week of monitoring Jonathan's burner phone. She worked in finance, had recently moved to Boston, and was clearly being love-bombed. He told her he was in the middle of a painful divorce. Classic. I arranged to meet her under the guise of a networking lunch through a women's professional group. She was charming, driven, and utterly unaware. When I slid a manila envelope across the table to her, she blinked. What's this? Just open it. Inside were printouts, images, marriage records, a timeline, our wedding photo. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to say something, but no words came. I left her there in the cafe with her illusions bleeding out on the table. Step 4. The financial strike. I had already opened a separate account under Claire Devon. I transferred half of our joint funds, my legal entitlement, into it through a silent midnight withdrawal and set the rest into a temporary freeze with my attorney's assistance. Jonathan wouldn't be able to access it without triggering an alert. That same day, I filed for divorce. Grounds: irretrievable breakdown. Supporting evidence: over 100 pages of documentation. I served him at his office, in front of his staff. Step 5. Exposure. Claire Devon posted a detailed thread on social media. Careful, clinical, anonymized at first. Then the names. Then the faces. Then the documents. It went viral within hours. Reddit, Twitter, even a trending segment on TikTok from a relationship advice influencer dissecting the audacity of Jonathan's duplicity. The media picked it up next. A respected consultant with 3 separate identities, 2 wives, and enough fraud to put his entire career in jeopardy. The fallout was nuclear. Jonathan, Jack, came home that evening like a man walking into a crime scene. His eyes were wild. He slammed the door behind him and threw his coat on the floor. "What the hell did you do?" I was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping wine. I didn't flinch. "I told the truth," I said. "You ruined me." "No," I said, setting the glass down. "You ruined yourself." I just turned on the lights. He paced the floor, muttering, grabbing at straws. His phone buzzed nonstop. At one point, he threw it across the room. It cracked against the wall. I handed him a manila folder. Inside was everything: the timeline, the evidence, the names of the attorneys he'd be hearing from, and a printed email from Julia, her response to the Dropbox link. All it said was, "Don't ever contact me again." He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. I stood, walked to the door, paused. "There's one more thing," I said quietly. He looked up, hollowed out. "What?" "You're going to pay restitution."
To me. To them.
"To the state. Or you're going to prison." He didn't argue. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Too quiet. Like the hush after a bomb detonates, when the air is still thick with smoke and all that's left is rubble. Jonathan stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. He moved his things into the guest room without a word. No excuses. No confrontation. Just silence. It was like watching a puppet with its strings cut, his movements jerky, aimless. He was a man unmoored, walking ghost-like through the house he once dominated. He called Julia dozens of times, left voicemails that curdled with desperation. I heard every one. "Please, Jules. It's not what you think. I can explain everything. You mean everything to me." But she never answered. Amanda blocked him completely. She wasn't interested in his brand of chaos anymore. He was radioactive. The law firm handling the divorce delivered every next blow like a metronome, precise, inescapable, measured in signatures and silence.
Court dates.
Asset evaluations. Restraining clauses. All backed by a fortress of evidence, immovable and sharp as glass. I watched him unravel in small ways at first. Missed calls from clients. Emails unopened. Anxiety crawling across his face like a rash. His office issued a quiet suspension. His consulting contracts froze. He'd try to rally in front of the mirror each morning, straightening his collar, adjusting his tie, but the suit hung differently now, looser, like it didn't believe in him anymore. Then came the knock at the door, a process server, this time from the state attorney general's office. He didn't even open it.
I did.
"Mr. Whitmore?" the man asked. "He's inside," I said calmly. "You can leave it with me." I placed the envelope on the dining table without a word. Jonathan didn't touch it for hours. When he finally did, he read it hunched over like a man reading his own obituary. I think he already knew what it was: the formal notice of investigation.
Fraud. Bigamy.
Tax evasion. The works. A litany of sins, finally notarized. But I wasn't done. My PI uncovered something else, something even I hadn't anticipated. A series of accounts offshore. Tiny deposits scattered across months, years. All under a corporate umbrella that didn't technically exist. Jonathan had been preparing for something long before I caught him. An escape plan. A vanish point. Maybe for when the juggling act eventually collapsed. I froze those two. And then I made my final move. I threw a garden party. Yes, a party. I invited my friends, a few neighbors, the women from my book club, and even some colleagues of Jonathan's, those who hadn't yet severed ties. I smiled as I poured sangria and served bruschetta under the twinkle lights he'd strung up last summer, never knowing he was decorating the stage of his own eulogy. And when people asked, as I knew they would, I told the truth. Not angrily, not bitterly. I told it with the calm clarity of someone who had walked through fire and emerged untouched. They listened, eyes widened, mouths slack. There were gasps, whispered repetitions, hands tightening around wine glasses. Some apologized. Some gossiped. Some simply looked at Jonathan with a new, wary gaze, as if they were seeing a man through unfiltered glass for the first time. It was the kind of slow death reputation rarely recovers from. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the garden had gone quiet, I found him sitting outside. Alone, slouched in one of the deck chairs, staring at the ground like it might swallow him whole. The twinkle lights buzzed above us, casting faint halos on his sunken face. "You planned this," he said flatly. I nodded. Every detail. He turned to me then, really looked at me for the first time in what felt like years. His face was drawn, hollow, but his eyes shimmered with something like realization, like loss, like he was finally grasping the depth of what he destroyed. "Why?" he asked. "Why not just leave?" I walked over and poured the last of the wine into my glass, letting the silence stretch taut between us. "Because you didn't just betray me," I said. "You erased me, rewrote our history without my consent. You made me a shadow in my own life, and I wanted you to feel what it's like to be made invisible, powerless, irrelevant." He nodded slowly. The wind rustled the leaves above us. Somewhere, a bottle clinked in the distance, one left behind, half empty. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was small, hollow, as if even he didn't believe it. "I know," I said, "but it doesn't matter. Because apologies are currency in a world that still believes in redemption." And I had moved into a world where only justice counted. Jonathan moved out 2 weeks after the garden party. There was no showdown, no final confrontation. Just the dull thud of the front door closing at dawn. He didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. He packed a few suitcases, loaded his car in silence, and vanished down the street as if trying to outrun the consequences clawing at his heels. The house, once a curated prison of routine and politeness, felt like it had been exorcised. The stillness that followed was profound, not empty, but expansive. For the first time in a long time, I felt air return to the rooms. The walls no longer echoed with secrets. The mirrors no longer lied. I stood on the porch as the sun rose, barefoot, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The sky was a bruised pink. I could hear birdsong, a sound that had been lost beneath the weight of deception. There was no rush to fill the silence he left behind. Instead, I let it stretch, let it wash over me. I wandered through the rooms, opened every window, and played music loud and defiant. I danced barefoot across the hardwood floor like a woman resurrected. The divorce was swift and lethal. His attorneys didn't dare drag it out, not with the arsenal of documentation I wielded. My lawyer called it the cleanest decimation he'd ever witnessed. I retained the house, the majority of our shared assets, and, most importantly, full legal ownership of every corporate document that tied Jonathan to the fraud he'd tried so hard to hide. When I handed over the records to state investigators, I did so with calm precision. No vengeance, just purpose. The last I heard, he was facing criminal charges in 2 states, with potential federal involvement. Julia had gone radio silent. Amanda dropped off the grid. He was radioactive. I didn't start over. I started true. I changed the locks, painted the kitchen a soft sea glass green, tore out the wine cellar he'd bragged about to his colleagues, and turned it into a writing studio. I lined the walls with books I loved, hung a mobile of brass birds from the ceiling. On my desk, I placed 2 things, a cork from the wine we'd served at the garden party and our wedding photo, edges singed, the frame blackened by fire, a relic of a version of me that no longer existed. People asked inevitably, at parties, at work, in whispers over wine, what really happened. I told them the truth, not out of bitterness or a need for spectacle, but because truth is like water. It finds the cracks and fills them. It cleanses. its shapes. Some people called me cold. Others called me brilliant. But most, the ones who mattered, called me brave. But bravery wasn't what I felt. I felt awake. One morning, months later, I found a letter in the mail. No return address. My name scrawled across the envelope in a handwriting I knew better than my own. Jonathan's. Inside, 3 lines. I see it now. Everything. I was never real without you. But I see that I never truly saw you either. I'm sorry. I didn't pause. I didn't read it twice. I walked outside, struck a match, and fed the paper to the flames of the backyard fire pit. The ashes curled into the breeze. Final. Some doors are not meant to be reopened. Some apologies, like ghosts, only haunt the living. The final chapter came not with drama, but with clarity. An email from a young journalist who had been following the court case. She asked if I'd speak publicly. Not just about the betrayal, but about the reclamation, the rebirth. I said yes. And I stood on that stage weeks later, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a woman who rewrote the ending. I spoke not of the man who deceived me, but of the woman I found on the other side of devastation. I told a room full of strangers that silence is not strength, that politeness is not protection, that when someone tries to write you out of your own life, you don't scream, you take the pen back, and you write every line, every scar, every truth, because reclaiming your story isn't loud, it's exact, it's deliberate, and it is the most exquisite kind of justice there is.